Mediterranean Sea, Mare Nostrum. In its coastal areas emerged the high cultures and great powers of the ancient world. Here, emperors and kings struggle for power and wealth. Whoever controls the Mediterranean has achieved the dream of imperial grandeur and rules the world. The Egyptian Empire exists for almost 3,000 years. The remains of its mighty works are still to be seen today, and 2,000 years after its decline, royal tombs and pyramids are still an inspiring sight. At the beginning of the 19th century, the first European scholars come to Egypt to dig for archaeological treasures along the Nile and in the desert. But the secrets of the empire of the pharaohs are not to be won so easily. Who were these royal rulers? What did they believe in? How did they acquire their wealth? And why did so much of it disappear under the desert sands? The rise of the pharaoh's empire is due to the Nile. The river's narrow, fertile banks are a source of life. But for the early Egyptians, the Nile is not only a blessing, but also a curse. There are other peoples who want a share of Egypt's wealth. Scientific knowledge and architectural skills are the foundations of an advanced culture and of great interest to spies from other countries. Today, archaeological finds have provided us with an almost complete picture of the pharaoh's empire. The information gleaned from ancient texts, the Bible, and surprising discoveries in the tombs tell of the beginning of the Egyptian empire.
Die Frage, wann eine Kultur anfängt,
the question when a culture begins or ends is not normally easy to answer. But in the case of Egypt, it's very clear. There's a definite beginning, the moment when two kingdoms are united. A kingdom from Upper Egypt subjugates Lower Egypt. A new state is founded, and this event is celebrated and memorialized in this new state.
3,000 years before Christ, Upper and Lower Egypt unite to form a new kingdom. It now extends along the Nile and over the whole delta. In this period, we also find the first examples of Egyptian writing, hieroglyphics.
Und das Ende ist
the end comes with the spread of Islam in the 7th century, and that's the break in the continuity of tradition that has held for over 4,000 years. It breaks because Islam emphasizes different features and, unlike the previous cultures, does not adopt the old Egyptian customs and practices, particularly where religion is concerned.
Throughout its almost 3,000-year-long history, the empire is repeatedly threatened by nomadic peoples from the desert, but Egypt is successful in beating off all their attacks. An internal danger seriously threatens the continued existence of the empire. From time to time, noble families revolt against the unlimited power of the pharaohs. The absolute ruler of Egypt is the pharaoh. He is the king, the high priest, and supreme commander of the army. His subjects worship him as a descendant of the gods. A person of high social standing has their precious possessions entombed with them. Robbers plunder the tombs, destroying important evidence of the Egyptian death cult. There are still many tombs hidden beneath the desert sand, containing everything a person needs for life in the land of the dead. What archaeologists find today when a grave is opened are often only the treasures that the thieves have failed to discover. The deceased is prepared for life on the other side. His tomb is laid out like a house, with furniture and food. The dead are given jewelry and other valuables to take with them. The plundering of the burial sites has destroyed almost all the evidence that could have cast light on the empire's varied history. What archaeologists and historians have to be content with today are usually pillaged burial chambers and empty sarcophagi. The chance discovery of what is called the List of Kings was a piece of luck for contemporary scholars.
Mit dem legendären Pharao Menes.
The Egyptian list of kings begins around 3000 BC with the legendary pharaoh Menes, whose historical existence is in doubt. Egypt is the first empire in history completely based on documentation. In this respect, the beginning of Egyptian history is the beginning of history itself.
Überhaupt.
The discovery of ancient Egypt starts in 1798. Napoleon defeats the Turks and presses on towards Cairo. Like the great conquerors of the ancient world, Napoleon too wishes to profit from the mythical power of this foreign culture. To rule over the lands of the Nile means to stand as an equal alongside the mighty pharaohs. The Egypt conquered by Napoleon is an impoverished land. The Nile has only a minor role. For the ancient Egyptians, however, the river is of major importance. It is the natural source of Egypt's prosperity. Only as long as the river holds sufficient water is the existence of the Egyptians assured. Yet at the same time, the Nile also represents an existential threat. Every year, the river floods its banks, and for 3 months the land is uninhabitable. But when the waters retreat, a layer of fertile river mud ensures a rich harvest to come. The farmers have to adapt to this cyclical natural disaster. Engineers and scientists develop an intricate irrigation system.
Dabei gab es ein Problem.
But there was a problem. The water disappeared before it reached the edges of the fields, where the desert began, and the sheer cliffs that bound the Nile Valley. There had to be pressure to get it to the edges, like the pressure that takes the blood from our arteries to the capillaries. Then you had to know when the flooding of the Nile was at its highest point. Then you had to have locks which were opened on a certain day at a certain hour, and then, as though driven by a beating pulse, the water would shoot into all the channels. Those were great events to celebrate in Egypt when the Nile brought the water.
Whoever wishes to rule Egypt must rule the Nile. A host of civil servants and the huge priesthood cannot be paid without good harvests. The prosperity of the country is literally drawn from the river. But even the skills of engineers are no match for the unpredictability of nature. If, as sometimes happens, the river doesn't flood and the ground dries out under the blazing sun, the harvest is destroyed. The population mainly consists of farmers and tradespeople. They enjoy a modest prosperity. They are paid for their work with grain. The Egyptians have no monetary system. The tradespeople live with their families by the construction sites of the pyramids and the royal tombs. Like the farmers, they are free people, not slaves who have to be forced to labor. When the Nile floods the fields, the farmers help in the building of the pyramids. They too are paid with the 2 basic foods, bread and beer. Egypt's social structure resembles a pyramid. The broad base consists of the farmers. Above them are the tradespeople, followed by the scribes and the priests. At the top is the pharaoh. He has control of the country's grain stores, for the fat years are often followed by the lean years. Then the Egyptians have to live off their reserves. Thousands of civil servants and scribes watch over the granaries and administer the distribution of grain in times of need. The Bible makes of the natural changing cycle of drought and flood the law of nature that 7 fat years must inevitably be followed by 7 lean ones. The diet of the Egyptians is monotonous. Bread and beer are their basic foods. In addition, the people eat lentils, beans, and peas. Rich people can enjoy onions, pumpkins, grapes, and dates. During the 7 fat years, there is a wonderful variety of food, and plenty of it. But a series of poor harvests means not only hunger and misery, but also domestic political crises.
Traditionally, Egyptian history is divided into 3 phases. A period when the empire flourished, several intermediate phases, and a late period. Firstly, the Old Kingdom, beginning around 2650 with the ascendancy of the Third Dynasty, and ending around 2120. Then the Middle Kingdom, essentially comprising the 11th and 12th dynasties, sometime around 2050 and 1650. And the New Kingdom, which begins with the 18th dynasty. The New Kingdom, the most famous and best known in Egyptian history, starts about 1550 and ends about 1070 or 1060 BC. Those are the 3 main phases of the flourishing period in Egyptian history. In between, there were periods of decline. Before the Thinnitic era, the first 2 dynasties, and then, in the 1st century BC, a late period, when Egypt is once more an important nation. Before being overrun first by Persians, then by the Syrians, and then by the Persians under Alexander the Great.
In 332 BC, Alexander the Great marches out of Persia against Egypt. Alexander and his followers are not just seeking to subjugate the rich lands of the Nile, they wish to settle here. Alexander is quick to understand the reasons for the success of the Egyptian social system. He adapts to it. Alexander the Great dresses like a pharaoh and rules like his predecessor. In this way, he avoids domestic conflicts and wins the support of the influential priests. By identifying with the ancient traditions, the ruling Persian dynasty secures its power for centuries to come. Egyptian society rests on 2 pillars, the power of bread and the power of religious faith. Believing in a life after death, the Egyptians prepare their dead for the passage into the afterlife. The dead person is mummified. The profession of embalmer is highly respected. On its way to the dark kingdom of death, the corpse is accompanied by the god Anubis. The preparations for the final journey begin while the person concerned is still alive. Pharaohs and wealthy Egyptians spend much time choosing the final resting place for their embalmed bodies. The kingdom of death is a mirror image of the kingdom of life. The tombs of the rich are furnished like palaces, the graves of the tradespeople like their modest homes. The tombs of the pharaohs are richly provisioned treasure chambers. The rulers change, but belief in the pharaoh as an emissary of the gods is constant. Religion gives each person their allotted position in the social order, and more than 200 gods accompany the Egyptians throughout their lives. Yet it is a pharaoh who will break with this tradition. who will disrupt the equilibrium of this society after more than 1,500 years.
Amenophis IV. bewirkte 1300
About 1350 BC, Amenhotep IV was responsible for revolution, albeit a brief one, in Egyptian history. He introduced the cult of the sun god, Aten, and managed to anger the whole of the Theban priesthood.
verärgerte damit im Übrigen natürlich die gesamte Priesterschaft von Theben.
He titled himself Akhenaten after this sun god. He's also famous, of course, because of his wife, Nefertiti.
Nofretiti.
Akhenaten plunges Egypt into its greatest ever crisis. In honor of the only sun god Aten, a city is built, Akhet-Aten, the new religious and political power center of the empire. Here, in the desert, on the upper reaches of the Nile stood the new capital. Today, not even the foundations remain. The consequence of a natural disaster, or the vengeance of the priests and the people? Akhenaten is known as the heretic king. For Akhenaten's break with tradition is radical. The empire has only one god, he commands. This god will be worshipped in the form of the sun. He is convinced that belief in the one god Aten will create a better world. Akhenaten has turned the existing world of the gods on its head and put the traditional social order of the empire into question. Not only are the gods rendered powerless, but also their priests. At the same time, Akhenaten presents himself as a ruler with a human face. He appears in public with his wife at his side. For the first time, Pharaoh's wife influences the affairs of state. Her name is Nefertiti. Egypt is on the brink of revolution. The priests are unemployed. They see their power base destroyed and their very existence under threat. The empire faces collapse. The Egyptians do not want to believe only in the god Aten. They wish to keep the old gods, and nevertheless, they are supposed to tear down the temples and destroy the statues of the gods. Akhenaten shatters the unity of pharaoh, gods, and priests that has existed for generations. Much against their will, the people submit to the new order. But their obedience is only skin deep. The old gods are hidden away, and in secret, the priests continue to celebrate the old rites. The prohibitions of the absolute ruler are ignored. Akhenaten's resplendent court and the building of the new capital, Akhet-Aten, cause an economic crisis. Like the people and the priesthood, the army too is unhappy, but it dare not rise in revolt against the godlike Pharaoh.
Jetzt wird der Sonnengott zu dem
Now the sun god is virtually the only god who is specially worshipped.
und den man sich
And he's not just a god you imagine during the rites, the sacrifices.
Opfern
He's a god
vorstellt, sondern den
you
man sich
feel an almost
dem
human
eine
affection for.
fast eine menschliche Zuneigung hat.
Akhenaten composed a hymn to him that is like a long prayer. Religious feelings appear. The sun is depicted with rays with little hands at the ends, which show that there is a connection between this god, this sun god, and mortal people, a close connection. And this reminds us of our own monotheistic religion. And that's one reason why this revolutionary religious edict was still thought so fascinating thousands of years later.
Welche Faszination noch Jahrtausende später ausgelöst hat.
Akhenaten's reign lasts for 16 years. Then the sun god Aten becomes once again one among many. Anubis, he who takes hearts to himself, has returned. Once again, he protects the ritual of embalming and watches over the city of the dead. More than 200 gods are worshipped in Egypt. Most of them have human form or are depicted as human beings with the head of an animal. Some are totally animal. Every town pays homage to its own god, for whom huge temples are built. Deep in their interiors, where no light penetrates, are kept the statues of the gods. Except for Pharaoh and the high priests, no one has access to these rooms. The priests are the guardians of the temple, the servants of the gods. Gold is Egypt's most important mineral resource. But one resource, which is of ever-growing importance, is lacking: iron ore. The smelting of iron ore is discovered in the 1st century BC. Egypt's enemies now forge their weapons from iron, and this gives them military superiority. Foreign armies now invade Egypt. First the Persians, then the Greeks, and finally, the Roman legions threaten the existence of the Egyptian Empire. Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen, recognizes the immediate danger and makes a desperate attempt to save Egypt from Rome. The Empire of the Pharaohs has existed for almost 3,000 years. A few decades before the birth of Christ, Rome becomes the latest threat. The Roman Empire includes the whole Mediterranean region. From here, it extends over Western Europe as far as the British Isles. Rome is only waiting for the right moment to turn fertile Egypt into one of its imperial provinces. Rome cannot afford to ignore Egypt's wealth. Here, Rome buys grain supplies for its troops. If Rome can conquer this granary and turn it into a province, then the Roman Empire can pursue its victorious policy of expansion with its food supplies assured. Egypt's situation appears hopeless. But instead of capitulating or abdicating, Cleopatra goes on the offensive and seeks to make an ally of Gaius Julius Caesar. Who was this woman?
Jedenfalls war sie eine hochgebildete Dame.
At any rate, she was a highly educated woman who, as well as Greek, also spoke some Egyptian and several other languages, which was not usual at the time, not even for members of the ruling clans. Cleopatra was the last queen of Egypt because after her death, her suicide, Egypt came under the rule of the Roman Empire.
In an alliance with Rome and Julius Caesar, Cleopatra sees her only chance of maintaining her country's independence. She has come to the throne by fratricide and intrigue. Now she presents herself to the Egyptians as the new empress. Accompanying her on the Nile in the royal barge is Julius Caesar. The Roman emperor is her political patron and protector. Uniting the old Egyptian empire with the ambitious military might of Rome promises to create a new, even more resplendent empire. Cleopatra offers the gold of the Nile, Caesar the armies of Rome. The priests support Cleopatra's aims. She is on the very verge of success when, in 44 BC, Julius Caesar is assassinated. Cleopatra's plans lie in ruins. Now Rome will rule over Egypt for almost 400 years. The gold of the Nile fills the coffers of the Roman state. Egyptian art adorns the capital of the Roman Empire. Pillars and obelisks weighing many tons are transported to Rome. After the Romans, the Byzantine Empire is in power on the Nile. with the new rulers comes a new religion, Christianity. Egypt becomes Christian, and the age of the pharaohs falls into oblivion.
When we talk about a period of time as long as over 3,500 years, then the obvious question is, can we speak about a fall, about a collapse? It's not so clear-cut. There's a constant ebb and flow, which is absolutely characteristic for the Egyptian culture. After major disasters, collapses, even after prolonged periods of decline, Egypt has always recovered, regenerated itself by picking up exactly where it left off. The Egyptians had an incredibly strong sense of tradition, and they believed they were living in a world that had always existed, a world of cycles in which everything, like the cycles of the sun, is constantly renewed. So scholars speak of the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and periods of crisis in between, and always there is a recovery.
2,000 years have passed since the end of the empire of the pharaohs. Even today, those godlike rulers such as Ramses, Akhenaten, and Cleopatra are still the stuff of legends and novels. Only since Napoleon's Egyptian campaigns brought him to the Nile have archaeologists and historians been interested in the Egyptian empire, so our knowledge about its history is only 200 years old. Archaeologists are still coming across new trails leading back into Egypt's mysterious past. Every fresh discovery is a further detail in the broader picture of Egyptian history. But new questions also emerge. What the researchers overlook is booty for the grave robbers. For thousands of years, they have burrowed through the desert earth in search of the pharaoh's hidden treasures.